Hi everyone, it's Rory from Made to Move. So today I'm focusing on the aspects of how technique and posture can really relate to how it influences injury, but also how it's going to compromise your performance whilst running. So there's different aspects. We're going to be looking at balance, hip position, and then foot contact. So these all play key elements in to be able to kind of a streamline whilst you're running, but also to ensure that you're not putting too much compensation through left or right as you make contact to the ground. So the first thing I wanted to cover is how hip flexor and hamstring strains can often be related to the same mechanics of running. If there's poor hip flexibility, you might have tight hip flexors or quadriceps. What happens is as you go through that swing phase and you're coming around, what happens is that drag and that force is then going to ultimately cause aches and pains around the hip flexors. Similarly, from this position, if you've got a weak hip flexor, then what tends to happen is you're relying on a tight, weak structure to then have to pull that leg through that hip drive to come into that hip flexion to then allow you to take the next step forward. And then if we also look at how hamstrings related to this swing phase and injuries, what tends to happen is if you've got tight hamstrings and you're coming through that hip flexor stage, that knee extension, what's going to happen is if it's tight and you're trying to push it through that end range, it's often where you're going to get strain in the tissue, but also as you're coming down and making contact with the ground to drive you forwards, if it's weak and you put it through that tightness stage, that propelling and that being able ability to push you through is not going to work effectively. So the next thing I want to talk about is hip stability and hip alignment. So this is a real crucial part because we're putting onto one leg. You then need to then count for balance, but also be able to reproduce force and stability over time. So it's well referenced that hip alignment is an important factor both for lower body but upper body mechanics, but also injury prevention. And so if you just look and see how you can stand, you want to be able to see, is your hip straight? Are you dropping it out? Or are you trying to find balance by swinging around? If you can't do that during standing and then you're running, which is known to put at least 6 to 8 times of body weight through each foot, you can see how that become a problem over time. And over time, pain then causes things to tighten up, then become an endless circle of injury. We also look at how hip alignment influences knee stability and also ankle injuries. What tends to happen is if you're trying to find some balance and maybe you're leaning over towards the side that's out, right, more than likely what's going to happen over time is your knee's going to fall in, which can cause you a lot of problems during the MCL, so the inside of the knee. But also, where your hip's trying to fire a lot, you're going to still cause some IT band issues because your knee's wobbling around, your hip's not stable. That can then ultimately lead to overpronation in the foot instability, ankle strains, because what's happening is you're finding an imbalance, your body's trying to compensate and find somewhere to land quickly, and then it starts to manifest over time. If we look into how foot contact influences injury, but also how it impacts performance as well, we can look at, say if you're landing flat-footed or on your forefront, what tends to happen is as you come through this swing phase up to the top, you then come down to your foot contact. If you're landing on the forefront first, you're asking a lot of work for the Achilles through the early stage of contact, which means as your other hip comes then through, okay, you've actually taken that whole load of that force through there, and then you're expecting it to then again engage more to push you forward. So what I like to tell my runners, especially novice runners, is because the speed tends to be a lot lower than you would be in maybe competition, is to focus on heel drive, because not only do you get the contact in the ground, it then asks for the hip extension, so the glutes and the hamstrings to engage first. Then what happens is as you come through the swing phase, you go through the midfoot, and then you're asking for the calves as the final bit to propel you forward. So if you're interested to see how your running technique is, if you're needing this addressing because you've got previous injuries that are not going away, you're failing to kind of push yourself through plateaus of training, then simply leave a comment down below, drop a message, or simply head to the website and book a consultation in then.